There are general elections and then there are generals elections, and this was the latter. Nawaz Sharif has the dubious distinction of appointing the most army chiefs in Pakistan's history.
Okay.
And it almost never turns out well, right? We had won the war, but the politicians surrendered. Nawaz Sharif decided to remove him and appoint Lieutenant General Khwaja Ziauddin Ahmed, who was at that point the DG ISI, like at the polling stations in South Punjab and so on and so forth. Unbelievably rigged. Shahid Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto, she had actually welcomed the coup. Who won the elections in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa? The Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal. So basically during the campaign thing, they were like, hamare liye vote, Quran ke liye vote. Chief Iftikhar Chaudhry was the Chief Justice. He was removed, and that led to the lawyers' movement, which some say was sponsored by General Asif Kiani, because there are wheels within wheels and there are boxes within boxes. And at that point, Nawaz Sharif gave this very incendiary speech saying that the court wants to bring back lotocracy. His partisans and his party members actually stormed the Supreme Court.
Pakistan's election have always been marred with some sort of chaos, some sort of problems, similar to something that is happening in 2024. But unfortunately, it is not the first time it is happening. It has happened often in its history. So today we have with us someone who I've always admired. I've looked forward to his analysis whenever there is a critical situation in Pakistan. It's no one other than Zarrar Khuhro.
Thank you so much.
My name is Hawwa Fazal, and today with Zarrar Khuhro we'll be discussing the 2002 elections.
Yes.
So, sir, without further ado, we'll just jump right into these elections.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot to jump into. Look, there are general elections and then there are generals elections, and this was the latter.
Okay.
Right, so that's pretty much how it was. Okay, so first of all, the fundamental power dynamic of Pakistan, right, is the struggle for power and control between what we like to call the establishment, and civilian politicians. Now, sometimes there's a bargain, sometimes there's push, sometimes there's pull. Almost always the house wins.
Okay.
And there is most of the time confrontation. The bargains don't usually last very long, because around the third year, the Prime Minister starts to think that he's actually the Prime Minister, and then there is a very harsh reality check. So this is the context to, just about every election in Pakistan, but in particular with the 2002 elections. The background to it, right? Obviously, Nawaz Sharif has the dubious distinction of appointing the most army chiefs in Pakistan's history.
Okay.
And it almost never turns out well.
Okay.
Right? Because kahin na kahin you're going to have a, what we like to call a phata. And when there is that, guess who wins? Right? We don't need to go further into that. What had happened here is that again, Nawaz Sharif had chosen Pervez Musharraf as his army chief, and pretty soon, and Pervez Musharraf had a very sort of extroverted, because they were commando, right?
Yeah.
So commandos will always prioritize tactics over strategy, right? You're going to capture this hill. We don't know why in the larger context, but your job is to capture the hill, so you have this tunnel vision, right? So he was very much a doer, for better or for worse, and sometimes he wouldn't think things through. The problems arose. One factor was Kargil. Right?
Okay.
Because, now again, opinion here remains divided, depends on who you believe, because unfortunately, Pakistan maybe the correct historical account really depends on who you're talking to, right? So I'm just going to be a little ambivalent about this. But in bullet points, the Pakistani military carried out an operation to capture the Kargil heights. Now, this was carried out with plausible deniability, in which the Northern Light Infantry was, sort of disguised as infiltrators. However, locals then warned the Indian military about it. And because it was sort of what you call a below-the-radar operation, right? Not an official operation.
Okay.
When, tactically it was brilliant, right? You did manage to capture it. You could have choked off the Indian forces there. But then strategically, they didn't think it through, right? So when India brought in its air power to bear, we couldn't do that. Then you're going into a proper war, right? So there's reason to believe that Nawaz Sharif was informed. There's reason to believe that he was like, "Theek hai, aap kar le." But then when the stuff hit the fan, the Americans were like, "Bhai, what are you up to?" Then Pervez Musharraf and I feel a lot of his comrades felt that they had been sold down the river, right? We had won the war, but the politicians surrendered. That's not necessarily true because, like I said, I mean, once the Indian air power had come into play, the only choice you had is, are you going to deploy the Pakistan Air Force, create an actual war or not? So that then became a serious bone of contention. There was other stuff going on, but I'm talking about the larger points. Then what happened is that the army chief was departing for Sri Lanka to attend the 50th anniversary celebrations of the Sri Lankan army. And right before that, he made some moves which were against the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. For example, he shuffled a lot of the military command, which of course you could say that's his discretion. And certainly there are very few prime ministers in Pakistan who can dictate to an army chief without consequences, right? So he basically forcibly retired Lieutenant General Tariq Parvez with the Corps Commander Quetta. He transferred Lieutenant General Salim Haider, Corps Commander Mangla, for allegedly leaking information about a Corps Commander meeting to the political leadership. Both of these guys were pretty close to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. So he felt it. You see, you got to understand, right? I mean, nothing is a monolith.
Yeah.
Okay, not even the establishment, right? So there are always people, who are closer to one group, closer to the other group. Recent history, for example, will provide the truth of that, right? That's evidence to it if you read between the lines. So all of this happened. For example, Tariq Parvez had been the younger brother of Federal Communication Minister Nadir Parvez. So you see the way these things link, right? So that happened. So while he was there, Nawaz Sharif decided to remove him and appoint Lieutenant General Khwaja Ziauddin Ahmed, who was at that point the DG ISI. Now, this was also unprecedented because prior to this, no DG ISI, no intelligence chief had ever been promoted to Chief of Army Staff. Baad mein, of course, General Kiani. So, because once the precedent was set, then the rest, of course, is history. There was the whole hijacking, so on and so forth. And that was obviously, not really the correct way to do this. It's like a guy leaves the house and you change the locks.
Yeah.
And then he's standing outside, let me in. And in Musharraf's case, he didn't knock at the door, he kicked it down.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, because one thing that the military will not tolerate, they don't have to like the chief, but as a general rule, as a pun intended, as a general rule, the establishment does not brook a challenge to its authority.
Oh, okay.
Right? Regardless of whether they like the chief or whether they don't like the chief, because then that comes to an institutional
problem.
That's an institutional issue, right? And it creates a precedent that they don't necessarily want created. So then there was the coup and so on and so forth. The ironic thing about the coup is that prior to that, and I'm sure we'll come to that, there's a lot. So, and it's a lot of moving parts. So this is going to go back and forth a lot. Prior to the coup, I mean, Nawaz Sharif had also, made himself somewhat unpopular. With some, attempts that you could construe as being an attempt to become a civilian autocrat. You have the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, so on and so forth. We'll come to that in a moment. So the coup, I mean, it's okay. So it's difficult to gauge broader public opinion. There was no social media at that time, so on and so forth. Even electronic media was, just simply PTV. Right? So you can't, I mean, I'm not going to go and say, okay, this was the national sentiment, so it's not that. But it is also true that at that point in time, Shahid Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto, she had actually welcomed the coup. Initially, because, and now you see people always point to that and they'll be like, oh, but how did she do this? But everything has a context. Okay, and the context to this is the incredibly confrontational relationship between the PMLN and the PPP.
Okay.
During, the late 80s, the 90s really. It was back and forth. One was 58-2B, the other one was like, yay. The other one 58-2B, the other one was like, yay. So it was this sort of, highly polarized, highly, Manichaean sort of setup, right? anything that hurts the other guy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So she assumed that this was the friend, but then it quickly became apparent that General Musharraf wanted to get rid of both the established political parties. Now, this is a recurring theme in Pakistani politics.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, somebody says, this isn't working, we need to hit the reset button. And the 2002 elections were exactly that. It was General Musharraf's attempt to hit the reset button.
So before he hit the reset button, he had a whole coup. What happened in the coup? What was the feeling like? It came in 1999 and it stayed for 2 years before he wanted to be legitimate again. What happened during that coup? And what was that?
Yeah, I mean, the same thing that happens in every coup. No?
We don't know about the coup.
Of course you do. They take over, like there's that famous picture of officials scaling the gate of of PTV, I believe, and so on and so forth. So it was like your traditional coup. I mean, the military took over all branches, I mean, the constitution was effectively abrogated and so on and so forth. It's not so much what happened during the coup that is important, is what happened afterwards. Because again, you have to realize that even dictators, or perhaps even especially dictators, somewhere inside themselves, they know, okay, we are not here by the will of the people.
Yeah.
So they have to give themselves at the very least the fig leaf of legitimacy.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 2002 elections were, yes, an attempt to do that, and let's not ignore, of course, international pressure, because when the coup happened, of course, if Pakistan was pretty much made a pariah. But then, as so often happens, a war takes place. And which war was this one? What happened in 2001? 9/11.
Oh, okay.
Right? It was 2001?
Yeah, it was 2001.
Yeah, I forget. Okay. So that happened, and all of a sudden, Pakistan's geostrategic importance went phew. Pakistan's stock price jumped 3,000%, and people are like, okay, man, he may be a military dictator, but we got to do business with him, right? So, and then they were like, hey, look, bro, I mean, you got to have an election, it doesn't matter what, right? Much like right now. But have an election, ताकि we can at least tell Congress, no, look, this is a democracy, there's a prime minister, what do you want? So that happened. So that happened.
But he came on via referendum.
Nee, that was wo. I mean, okay, do you know how much he got in the referendum? What? He got 99 point. Give me a minute here. It's in here somewhere. So I can't find the exact figure, but it was 98% or 99% approval rate. 97.97% approval rate.
Okay.
Which I will say, I will give him credit, at least he didn't go down the Zia route and do 99%. But it's still a little worse than what Sisi in Egypt just right now did. He had the decency to give himself an 87%. Just to make it look real. So that was again an attempt for legitimacy.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, come on, 97.97%, that's never going to happen. So,
So we've always
also
heard...
there was no requirement for an ID card in the referendum. So I mean, come on. I mean, we're not really taking that seriously. Right? Then that brings us to the 2002 elections, which were very interesting.
What happened in those elections?
What didn't happen in those elections? First of all, you see that the attempt to break the political duopoly, right, of Noon and PPP, all of a sudden another party was carved out of the PMLN, which was the
Pakistan Muslim League. Q.
Qaid-e-Azam, जिसको हम प्यार से cycle बोलते हैं, right? This is called the cycle.
Okay.
That was their election symbol, I think Mia Muhammad Azhar. So at that point in time, the PPP and the PMLN had de facto been knocked out. Okay. Not legitimately. Obviously, a coup is not legitimate. For example, Benazir Bhutto Sahiba and Nawaz Sharif were both in exile. And there were restrictions. So what the PPP did is that they created a new party called the Pakistan People's Party Parliamentarians, the PPP, and they contested under that. Meanwhile, the PMLN had been broken into two factions. There was obviously Pakistan Muslim League Noon, since Nawaz Sharif was in exile, so Javed Hashmi Saab
Okay.
Javed Hashmi paid a serious price for it. He was incarcerated for many years, and that's why they say na Baghi. That's why they call him that. So he earned a great deal of respect for that, and respect that survives till this day. And then, of course, under Mia Muhammad Azhar, this is the Chaudhry Shuja, Chaudhry Parvez Ilahi group. They formed the PMLQ, and they obviously won the elections. There was really never any doubt. The 2002 elections are one that I saw fairly up close, like at the polling stations in South Punjab and so on and so forth. Unbelievably rigged, right? I mean, every single administrative department was brought into power, from the police to the returning officers to the people who counted the vote, because I don't know if it was Stalin who said, it's not the votes that matter as much as the people who count the votes, and the people who count the votes were all obviously on that side. So I remember one of my relative of mine was standing from the PMLQ against two other relatives of mine, one who was PMLN and one who was PPP, and I remember he said, "Beta, there is no point for anyone to spend any money campaigning in this election, because it's already done." So like right now, for example, you're talking in the context of the 2024 elections, do you see any campaigning? Do you see placards, rallies, banner flexes? Because why? When you've already been awarded a no-bid tender, why would you waste money on advertising? Think about it, right? True. So that happened. The other really interesting thing happened. And now here is one dramatic irony of Pakistani politics, is that you have repression and disenfranchisement dressed up as reform. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Here I'm talking specifically about the graduate degree requirement. Okay? Acha, now we're sitting in the cities, na? हम तो मतलब आपको पढ़ा लिखा समझते हैं ना, who have got an MBA, who have got an MBBS, and there is always, especially in the urban centers of Pakistan, this thing, why are these uneducated, these dirty, uneducated, muchhad masses coming into power? They don't even have a degree. So what Musharraf did is, no, we need to sweep clean, we need to do a cleanup. Every military dictator does this. Okay? It never ever works, right? But we do it again. As Einstein said, like, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? So हम सब पागल हैं. हम नहीं, लेकिन वो maybe. We can edit that out. That's dangerous. Or leave it in for comic relief. It's up to you. So what happened is he implemented the graduate degree. Okay, if you don't have a diploma, you can't contest elections. Now on the face of it, like, what's wrong with that? That's a good thing, but then you have to understand, what is the state of education in Pakistan? So are you not effectively disenfranchising millions upon millions of people?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. And here's the fun part. Okay, who won the elections in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa? The Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal, which was a collection of religio-political parties, JUI, JI, the others, also affectionately known as the Mullah Military Alliance. Now, why were they called that? Because rhetorically, you see, you have to understand that this is, and best part, their intikhabi nishan, their election symbol was the book.
Oh.
Yeah, guess which book? You see, during the...
Constitutional one?
No, it's the Military Mullah Alliance. Come on, man. So basically during the campaign thing, they were like, hamare liye vote, Quran ke liye vote.
Oh my God. Classic religion. Classic.
Right? But now you might ask, but these guys have degrees. How come they're contesting elections? So here's the loophole that Musharraf left. A madrasa sanad was considered the equivalent of a degree. So you have disenfranchised vast majority of politicians, but you have allowed them. However, a pending higher court judgment on the case was left pending as a sword hanging over their heads. If you guys step out of line, suddenly the Supreme Court might decide that, hey, this is not right, and all of you guys are out. There's another theory, and there's some validity to it. Ek to he wanted to channelize, there was a lot of, generally anti-American feeling after 2001, when the war on terror started, the Forever War, right? So the MMA definitely took advantage of that. But there is also fairly plausible theory that Musharraf also allowed this to show America and the West, hey, look, man, people are really angry at you guys, so if you don't support me, these guys might just take over. It is also the first time in Pakistan's history, to my knowledge, because a lot of it happened, I don't pretend that I remember all of it, right, that a religio-political alliance actually took power. Prior to this, I mean, the liberal element would always be like, but they have street power, but they don't actually have any political power. This is the first time that they actually legitimately controlled a province.
Okay. How did they do with that power?
Well, as well as anybody does. They did some of the random stuff and so on and so forth. Look, it's the illusion of control. Really, everything was done by Musharraf. So they would be sort of dishonest to really, judge them by their own merits. They were a useful force at that point in time. But the thing is, they were as useful as a tissue paper, right? So once you've blown your nose with a tissue paper, what do you do with it? You put it back in your pocket?
You throw it out.
You throw it out. And that has actually been the history with most political parties. They serve a certain purpose. Once that purpose is over, so are they.
They're gone in front of your eyes. So there's this Supreme Court's, power and their rule in, coming and going up, everything that marred in these elections. What was that? How was Supreme Court so, relevant in these elections?
The PCO came in. Are you talking about the PCO?
Yeah. What was
Well,
that?
Once the emergency was imposed, later on, every dictator has a shelf life, right?
Okay.
So eventually, this sort of this underlying resentment and PPP and PMLN having been left out in the cold so long, these things build up. Okay, any dictatorship looks very solid, but it's actually based on very weak foundations.
Okay.
You see, so public sentiment, a lot of things came in. The whole Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhary thing. A lot of people say that it was General Asif Kiani who was behind.
Can you explain what was this Iftikhar Chaudhary thing?
Oh, come on.
Okay.
No. It's just like when I started going back over this, it was like, my God, I'd forgotten half of this because so much happens. The Chief Iftikhar Chaudhary was the Chief Justice. He was all good with Musharraf. Then there was this particular incident. I don't recall the exact incident, but he was removed. And that led to the lawyers' movement, which some say was sponsored by General Asif Kiani, because there are wheels within wheels and there are boxes within boxes.
Okay.
And there are conspiracies within conspiracies, right? We didn't know that at the time. Nobody really, most people didn't. So we thought it was like a, movement for the restoration of justice. And I found that every time you start thinking, okay, this is it. This is the guy. He's going to fix things. You are almost always wrong. There's always an agenda.
Yeah.
Right. So you cannot help but become bitter, untrusting, and cynical in this place, as I am. And as most people should be, I feel. So that happened. Then, emergency was imposed, more or less. I'm giving you a rough timeline. I'll always remember the emergency because I had invested in the stock market at the time. And when it happened, then, the stock market locked Nietzsche 6 times, lost a ton of money. So we all remember that from that point of view. That happened. Then the emergency obviously was challenged. Because it was, unconstitutional.
Challenged by who?
But I was challenged. Several, parties went to the, I don't remember the exact timeline again. Several parties went to the Supreme Court, but then the Supreme Court itself was kicked out and blah, blah. And then the Provisional Constitutional Order came in, the PCO, in which basically all and most of the PCO, here we go. So this was October 14, 1999. So now we're going to, go back. The PCO happened then. My bad. See, now I get confused because the emergency came later, PCO came first. This is when he took over, the constitution was held in abeyance and judges had to then take an oath under this. So these were known throughout history as the PCO judges.
Okay.
And generally not considered, they were considered to be traitors to the...
Why are they called it? Traitors or
Yeah, because they took oath under a dictator with the constitution in abeyance, and at least on paper, Supreme Court judges are required to uphold the constitution. So if you're going to take oath to a guy who's abrogated the constitution, isn't that a contradiction in terms?
A lot of judges stood out to him, and
that's the lawyers' movement. Then the lawyers' movement starts, right? Andar Khani bhi bahut cheezein hoti thi, but you have to also realize that finding historical records of these things is not easy because you had also a lot of restriction. Musharraf also, of course, then opened up the the electronic media, which eventually ended up biting him.
How did that happen?
How did it end up biting him?
Yeah.
Because when public sentiment changed, then so did the media's line. And at that point, I think the state wasn't quite as adept at controlling the media as it is now.
Okay.
You see, now they've learned how. I mean, even then it's imperfect, as all things are. But at that time it was different. I mean, he did it also arguably because during Kargil, it was the Indian media that dominated global airwaves. We just had PTV, and really, I mean, who's going to listen to that? So it was a force multiplier in terms of propaganda and in terms of taking Pakistan's view to the world and so on and so forth. But it ended up sort of biting him.
You also mentioned that there was fractions within PMNN and PPP. How did those fractions, which were newly formed in PPP, People's Party?
PPP was not a faction. Because there were restrictions on the Pakistan People's Party, they made a new party to get past those restrictions. Look, I'll give you an example. Like, for example, right now, PTI has not got the balla, right? So if they try to do a PTI parliamentarians launch a new party, that is it. It's the same party, just under a different name.
Okay.
PMLN split into Q and N.
Okay.
You see, Q with the state sponsorship, and N being the target of state repression. That's how it went down.
There was this very famous 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, which were termed as one of the most key things that happened. Can you explain what is that?
The one thing I absolutely hate about Pakistani politics is that it requires you to be at least half a lawyer. Because it's all like this case, that amendment, section 5, 7, subsection 12. It's maddening. I hate it. I should have just become a lawyer. Probably be happier right now. Who knows? Now this is important both these amendments are important in the context of why there wasn't really a massive public backlash when Musharraf deposed Nawaz Sharif. Okay, so again, rewind a little bit. Okay? Benazir Bhutto's government gets dissolved. Under 58 2B, I believe this time by Farooq Lakhari, who was in fact very close to her. So this was considered and is still considered to be a Judas type of act, to be a betrayal, right? But without going into too much detail on that. Nawaz Sharif came into power, he had an absolute majority. An absolute majority, as we previously said, means that you have the power to amend the constitution itself, right? He brought into effect the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, the president's powers to remove the National Assembly just because he feels like it. Literally, just because he feels like it.
Okay.
You don't have to say anything. You can say, I'm removing it because I don't like this guy's face. It would still be fine. Okay? Yeah, it was a terrible thing. He removed that. Okay. Excellent. Wow. Once again, you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. Okay. Then he subsequently, a few months later, brought in the 14th Amendment. Now, you got to understand how this works here. Okay. In the 14th Amendment, you could no longer vote against party lines. Now, what does that mean? You're Nawaz Sharif.
Okay.
You're the party head. I am, Khwaja Rafiq. Okay, I'm your MNA. Okay. You bring in a bill saying that from tomorrow, all Khwajas have to shave their heads and paint their face black. I can't vote against it.
Okay.
Or I will be removed from the party seat. And my vote will no longer count. So this is basically removes nearly every institutional check and balance on the Prime Minister's power, turning the Prime Minister de facto into a civilian dictator. So it was a power grab. Now one can argue that, well, almost everyone wants to do it, be in absolute power. We saw that in recent times.
Yeah.
Right? And then, after Pride comes a great fall.
Yes.
Right?
Every
because
time.
there is only one power in this country. Have you ever seen Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
There is only one Lord of the Ring.
Go with this.
And he does not share power. So there is only one Lord of the Ring and he does not share power. You see, so this is Nawaz Sharif trying to become an autocrat. At that point, now here's the interesting part, right? This is 1997 we're talking about. Okay. So I've gone a little further back. This is pre-coup, pre-Musharraf. Now obviously every other party was like, what the hell, yaar?
Yeah.
You can't do this. So a bunch of petitions landed up in the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, क्या कहते हैं, there was Chief Justice Sajjad Ali Shah. Okay, and Sajjad Ali Shah was hearing this case and some other cases. Okay, and at that point, Nawaz Sharif gave this very incendiary speech saying that these guys the court wants to bring back lotocracy. You know what lota is?
Oh yeah.
Like not the bathroom wala, political sense.
Yeah, something like that.
Someone who can just go here and there. अच्छा, नवाज शरीफ sold the 14th Amendment कि मैं ये लोटो वाला system बंद करूँगा. Because पहले क्या होता था कि there's a vote going on, so somebody would approach me, buy me off, or give me incitement, inducements, and I would vote in a certain way. Okay, so he brought in the 14th Amendment because anytime you want to, even if the purpose is to grab power for yourself, you're not going to package it like that.
Yeah.
Like for example, when America wants to bomb a country and steal its resources, it always says we're doing it to bring democracy and freedom. Right? Packaging different, product alag hai. Right? So this again, packaging was different, product was alag. So he gave this incendiary speech, and then his partisans and his party members actually stormed the Supreme Court. And Tariq Aziz, if you know, Nilam Ghar.
Yeah.
Oh my God!
Yes.
Water cooler aapka hua. So he was also part of it, and so on and so forth. And then that very much strengthened the perception that this country is going towards a dictatorship. So when Musharraf took over, they were like, fine, civilian dictator, military dictator, what's the difference? He seems like a cool guy.
Yeah.
He's talking about enlightened democracy. He's got these like cute little doggies. And you got to realize our previous experience of a military dictator was Zia. So this guy was considered to be the anti-Zia.
Okay.
So that's what happened. So like I said, Musharraf had his support. He had his support, but unfortunately overestimated it. Like I remember when Musharraf was coming back, and there was an interview. It was after he was gone and he was trying to make a comeback. He had an interview saying, and somebody asked him, like, what about your popular support? He's like, but I have 1 million Facebook followers.
Okay, at that time maybe that counted.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Everything comes around again. Mark Twain ka tha, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
It definitely.
Yeah. So even in recent times, Justice Munib made a judgment, I believe, during this vote of no confidence thing, that if you vote against party lines, you will be disbarred. So even that was kind of like, in one sense, another form of the 14th Amendment, but this time in the shape of a court judgment. So you can make that argument. So this is sort of how it went down. I have gotten my timeline a little messed up.
It's fine.
At some point, but even when I was studying history, I was never very good at the date and day. But it was more about the overall flow of events, if that makes sense.
So there was this one thing you mentioned that Musharraf was very popular. What was?
I wouldn't say he was very popular, but he certainly there was, especially in urban centers, there was a lot of popularity for him.
Okay.
And then that also, like in many other ways, because then he also tried to set up the local body system, the Nazim and the Naib Nazim system.
Yeah. Exactly. It was one thing which he did, which he was successful in doing.
Yeah.
Unarguably.
But what were his motivations for it? Is the question. You see, now one can argue, now first of all, I will say I am a huge supporter of local governments.
Yeah.
Huge, okay? I do believe that you cannot progress without strong local bodies and strong local governments. Because it's not the MPA and the MNA's job to get your sewers cleaned.
Yeah.
That is the local government's job. They are on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay? I'll give you a quick example. When we had floods a couple of years ago, right? You've heard of the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority.
Yes.
Beneath that is the PDMA. That's the Provincial Disaster Management Authority. But beneath that is supposed to be the DDMA, the District Disaster Management Authority. It literally doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So you can sit in Islamabad, you can sit in the provincial capitals, you can make grand plans, but the people who are going to implement it on the ground do not exist. So how is it going to work? So it didn't work. So Musharraf wanted to strengthen the local body systems. If you want to be charitable, you could say because he genuinely wanted governance to improve. I'm not going to say that perhaps that wasn't one of the motivations. But I do believe that the central motivation was to undercut the political class. So this is why if you take a close look at Pakistan's history, it is always dictators who support local bodies. Because that bypasses the traditional MNA, MPA system and creates a new political class, parallel political class that is answerable to the dictator, not to their party leaders.
Okay. So if you had to summarize the elections in one headline.
The general's election.
As simple as that.
Less is more.
Less is more. So if you had to give like a similarity between these elections and the elections that happened in 2002, what would you say?
Have you ever seen World Wrestling Federation?
Yeah.
You've seen it?
Yeah.
Right. Now everybody knows that Hulk Hogan is going to beat The Undertaker, but you still have to do commentary on it.
Okay, this is exactly.
I laugh because, you know, when you realize what a joke everything else, being the comedian is the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah. At this point, yes, 2024 elections, yes.
No, it's always been a joke.
Always.
It'll always be a joke.
There's never
Best thing is to not take it too seriously.
to take elections not too seriously.
Anything.
Okay, this was the most interesting conversation I've had.
I'd like to think so. Thank you.
I had a lot of fun and a lot of learning, and I hope our viewers did as well. So this was the 2002 elections with Zarrar Khuhro. If you're looking forward to the 2008 elections, they would be with Shahzeb Jalani. This show is produced by DawnNews English in collaboration with Dawn.com. I'm Hawwa Fazal. Stay tuned for more episodes. Thank you.